What if you wrote a warning to yourself in 2015 that would save your entire future? What if that warning was about someone you trusted completely? Today, I'm going to tell you the most chilling story about premonitory letters that will make you question everything you think you know about time, intuition, and the people closest to you. Stay with me because this gets darker than you can imagine. The rain hammered against the windows of my apartment in downtown Seattle as I sorted through the old cardboard boxes I'd found in my grandmother's attic. Eleanor Blackwood had passed away 3 months ago, leaving me her Victorian house and all its mysteries. I was her only living relative, and frankly, I'd expected nothing more than dusty furniture and faded photographs. But hidden behind a false panel in her bedroom closet, I discovered something that would change my understanding of reality forever. A wooden chest, no bigger than a shoebox, filled with letters. Not just any letters. Letters written in my own handwriting, but addressed to me with postmarks from years past. The first one I picked up made my blood run cold. The envelope was yellowed with age, postmarked September 15th, 2015, written in my unmistakable scrawl across the front. To David Morrison, open October 12th, 2024. Today was October 12th, 2024. With trembling hands, I tore open the envelope. Inside, on my grandmother's personalized stationery, was a message that stopped my heart. David, whatever you do, don't trust Maria Castellanos. She will destroy everything you've built. The company, your reputation, your future, she will take it all. I know this sounds impossible, but you must believe me. I am you, writing from 2015, and I've seen what she becomes. Stop her before it's too late. David Morrison, September 15th, 2015. I dropped the letter as if it were on fire. Maria Castellanos, my business partner, my closest friend, the woman I'd trusted with my life for the past 9 years. We'd built Nexus Technologies together from nothing, turning it into a multi-million-dollar cybersecurity firm. Maria was like a sister to me, the most loyal person I knew, and according to this impossible letter, she had already betrayed me. I stared at the letter for what felt like hours, my mind racing through every possible explanation. A prank? But who would know about my grandmother's secret compartment? A forgery? But the handwriting was unmistakably mine. Every loop, every slant, even the way I dotted my I's with tiny circles instead of dots. With shaking fingers, I reached for my phone and scrolled through my emails. What I found made my stomach plummet. 3 hours ago, while I'd been lost in grief and memories in my grandmother's house, I'd received an automated notification from our company's bank. A wire transfer for $2.3 million had been executed from our business account. The authorization code belonged to Maria. I called her immediately. The phone rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. You've reached Maria Castellanos. I'm currently unavailable, but leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Racing back to the chest, I found more letters, each one dated and sealed for specific dates over the past 9 years. With desperate hands, I tore through them, reading warnings about business deals gone wrong, partnerships that would fail, investments that would turn sour. Every single prediction had come true with terrifying accuracy, but it was the letter dated January 3rd, 2020, that made me understand the true scope of what was happening. David, by now you've realized that these letters are real. You're wondering how this is possible, how you could be receiving warnings from your past self. The truth is more incredible than you can imagine. Grandmother Eleanor wasn't just eccentric. She had a gift, and she passed it to you. The letters aren't from the past, they're from a place outside of time itself. The letter continued. Maria has been planning this for years. She's been slowly transferring company assets, building relationships with our clients behind your back, preparing to launch her own competing firm with everything she's stolen from us. Tomorrow, she'll present the board with fabricated evidence that you've been embezzling funds. By the end of the week, you'll be forced out of your own company, facing criminal charges that will destroy your reputation forever. I looked at the date on my phone. January 4th, 2020. I was already 1 day too late. The next morning, I arrived at the Nexus Technologies offices on the 47th floor of the Columbia Center, with a knot in my stomach that felt like a tumor. Everything looked normal. The bustling open-plan workspace, the familiar faces of our employees. the Seattle skyline stretching endlessly beyond our floor-to-ceiling windows. But I saw it all differently now, as if I were looking through a lens that revealed hidden truths. Maria was already in the conference room with our board of directors when I arrived. She looked up as I entered, her dark eyes meeting mine with what I had always interpreted as warmth and friendship. Now, I searched her face for signs of deception, for the calculating coldness that the letters had warned me about. "David, perfect timing," she said with that brilliant smile that had charmed investors and clients for years. "I was just presenting some concerning financial irregularities I discovered in our accounts." My heart hammered against my ribs as she turned to the projection screen. Spreadsheets filled with numbers, transaction records, bank statements, all pointing to a pattern of embezzlement that led directly back to me. The evidence was masterful in its fabrication, so detailed and convincing that even I began to doubt myself for a moment. Board member Harrison Wells, a silver-haired venture capitalist who'd been with us since the beginning, frowned as he studied the documents. "David, these transactions show systematic withdrawal of funds over the past 18 months. Can you explain these discrepancies?" I opened my mouth to defend myself, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain that I'd been warned about this moment by letters from an impossible source? How could I tell them that my trusted partner was a master manipulator who had been planning this betrayal for years? "I need time to review these documents," I managed to say, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "This is the first I'm seeing any of this." Maria's expression shifted subtly, a micro-expression of satisfaction that she quickly masked with concern. "Of course, David. I understand this must be overwhelming. Perhaps we should adjourn until you've had a chance to consult with our accountants and legal team." As the board members filed out of the conference room, Maria lingered behind. For a moment we were alone, and I saw something flicker across her face, something cold and calculating that confirmed every warning in those impossible letters. "You look pale, David," she said softly. "Are you feeling all right?" "Just tired," I replied, studying her face. "It's been a difficult week with my grandmother's passing." Her expression softened, and for a moment I saw the Maria I thought I knew. Compassionate, caring, loyal. It made the betrayal even more devastating. That night I locked myself in my home office and spread out every letter from the mysterious chest. Under the harsh light of my desk lamp, I began to piece together a timeline that painted a picture so disturbing it made me question everything I thought I knew about free will and destiny. The earliest letter was dated March 22, 2015, 6 months before our company had even been officially incorporated. It warned me about a potential investor named Marcus Chen, who would try to buy into our company with dirty money from overseas shell corporations. I remembered that meeting clearly. Marcus had seemed legitimate, professional, offering us exactly the seed funding we needed. But something about him had made me uncomfortable, and I'd ultimately declined his offer. Now I realized it hadn't been intuition that saved me. It had been this letter. Another letter dated August 14, 2016, warned me about a cyber attack that would target our servers exactly 18 months later. The letter provided specific details about the attack vector, the malware signature, and even the exact time and date it would occur. I had implemented the security measures described in the letter without really understanding why, attributing my paranoia to professional caution. The attack had been thwarted completely. Letter after letter revealed a pattern. I had been living my life according to warnings from a source that claimed to be myself, writing from outside of linear time. Every major decision, every business move, every relationship choice had been influenced by these impossible messages. But the most chilling discovery was a letter dated September 30, 2018, that contained detailed financial projections for our company's growth. The projections were accurate to the penny, predicting exactly when certain contracts would be signed, when specific employees would be hired, and when certain expenses would be incurred. At the bottom of the letter, in handwriting that looked rushed and urgent, was a single line that made my blood freeze. "She knows about the letters. Maria has been reading them. She's been planning around them, using your foreknowledge against you. The game is deeper than you realize, and she's always been 3 moves ahead." I rushed back to my grandmother's house, my heart pounding with each step up the creaking stairs to her bedroom. The secret compartment stood open, just as I'd left it. But something was different. The dust patterns around the chest had been disturbed. Footprints in the old carpet led from the door to the hiding place and back again. Someone else had been here. Someone else knew about the letters. And I had a terrible suspicion about who that someone was. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my car outside Maria's Georgetown apartment building, watching the windows of her third-floor unit, trying to reconcile the woman I'd trusted for nearly a decade with the calculating betrayer described in the letters. The rain had stopped, but Seattle's perpetual mist clung to everything like a shroud, making the city feel otherworldly in the pre-dawn darkness. At 6:47 a.m., Maria emerged from the building dressed in her typical business attire, a sharp navy blazer, crisp white shirt, and those black heels that clicked authoritatively against pavement. She moved with purpose, checking her phone as she walked toward her silver BMW. But something was different about her demeanor. There was a tension in her shoulders, a quickness to her movements that suggested she was operating under stress. I followed her, keeping a safe distance through the morning traffic. Instead of heading toward our downtown offices, she drove north, taking the I-5 toward the suburbs. My confusion deepened when she exited near Northgate and pulled into the parking lot of a storage facility called Secure Space Self-Storage. From my position across the street, I watched through binoculars as Maria used a key to open Unit 247. What I saw inside made my world tilt on its axis. Boxes upon boxes of documents, computer equipment, and what looked like corporate files. She spent nearly an hour inside the unit, loading several boxes into her car with the methodical efficiency of someone executing a long-planned operation. When she finally drove away, I waited 10 minutes before approaching the storage facility. The manager, a heavy-set man named Bill with grease stains on his work shirt, was surprisingly helpful once I explained that I was Maria's business partner and needed to access our shared storage unit. Unit 247? Yeah, she's been renting that for about 3 years now, Bill said, consulting his records. Paid up front for 5 years, actually. Said it was for business documents that needed climate control. 3 years. That meant Maria had been planning this long before any of the recent letters had warned me about her betrayal. She'd been storing evidence, building her case, preparing for this moment since 2021. Has anyone else accessed the unit recently? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Bill checked his logbook. Just her, regular as clockwork. Usually comes in on the first Tuesday of every month, sometimes brings new boxes, sometimes takes stuff away. But she was here yesterday too, which was unusual. Seemed pretty focused, if you know what I mean. Yesterday. The same day I discovered the letters in my grandmother's house. The coincidence was too perfect to be accidental. That afternoon, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. I broke into the storage unit. It wasn't difficult. The lock was a standard master lock, and I'd learned to pick locks as a teenager, a skill that had seemed useless until now. My hands trembled as I worked the tumblers, but within minutes the lock clicked open. What I found inside made me understand that the betrayal ran deeper than I'd ever imagined. The storage unit was organized like a war room. One entire wall was covered with photographs of me, our employees, our office building, even my grandmother's house. There were detailed timelines mapping out every major event in our company's history, annotated with notes in Maria's precise handwriting. Financial documents, copied contracts, employee records, all meticulously cataloged and cross-referenced. But it was the corner labeled temporal intelligence that made my legs nearly give out beneath me. Photocopies of my letters, every single one of them dating back to 2015. Maria had been systematically copying the premonitory warnings, studying them, analyzing the patterns. Her notes covered the margins. D doesn't know source of information. Predictions 100% accurate so far. Possible psychic ability. Research Eleanor Blackwood family history. A thick folder labeled Eleanor Blackwood Investigation contained genealogical charts, newspaper clippings, and what appeared to be research into paranormal phenomena. Maria had traced my grandmother's lineage back 5 generations, identifying a pattern of women who had been known in their communities as wise women, seers, and fortune tellers. One article from the Spokane Chronicle dated 1943 featured a photograph of a young woman who looked remarkably like my grandmother. The headline read, "Local Woman's Predictions Save Factory Workers from Disaster." The article described how Eleanor's great-grandmother had warned factory workers not to come to work on a specific date because she'd dreamed of an explosion. When a boiler malfunction killed 3 people who hadn't heeded the warning, the surviving workers credited her with saving their lives. But the most disturbing discovery was a detailed psychological profile Maria had compiled about me. Pages and pages analyzing my behavior patterns, my decision-making processes, my emotional triggers. She'd been studying me like a lab rat, understanding my psychology so thoroughly that she could predict exactly how I would react to any given situation. The final folder, labeled Project Nexus Extraction, contained her complete plan for stealing the company. Every detail had been mapped out with military precision: which board members could be turned, which employees would be recruited to her new firm, which clients could be poached, and exactly how she would frame me for embezzlement while positioning herself as the innocent victim who discovered my crimes. At the bottom of the folder was a letter addressed to me, sealed but not mailed. With numb fingers, I tore it open. "David, if you're reading this, then you've discovered my storage unit, which means you're finally beginning to understand the true game we've been playing. Yes, I know about your letters. I've known since 2016, when I followed you to Eleanor's house after you received one of your warnings. I've been reading them, copying them, using your impossible foreknowledge to build my own plans around your predicted actions. You think you've been receiving messages from yourself, but the truth is far more complex. Eleanor didn't just pass you a gift, she passed you a curse. Every letter you've received has been steering you toward this moment, toward this betrayal. You've been dancing to a tune that was composed long before you were born, following a script that was written to destroy you. The real question, David, is whether you're strong enough to break free from the pattern that's been controlling your life, or whether you'll continue to be a puppet dancing on strings you can't even see. Your move. Maria. I sat in that storage unit for hours, surrounded by the evidence of Maria's meticulous betrayal, trying to process the implications of what I'd discovered. The letters weren't just warnings from my future self. They were part of a larger pattern, a game that had been playing out across generations of my family. My phone buzzed with a text message from Maria. "Board meeting moved to tomorrow, 9 a.m. We need to discuss your situation before the vote." The vote. She was forcing the board to vote on my removal from the company I'd built from nothing. Desperate for answers, I drove back to my grandmother's house as the sun set over Elliott Bay. The Victorian mansion felt different now, not like the warm refuge of childhood memories, but like a puzzle box filled with secrets I was only beginning to understand. In Eleanor's study, I found her personal journals, hidden behind a row of recipe books that I'd overlooked in my initial search. The leather-bound volumes dated back to 1952, when she was just 18 years old. Her elegant handwriting chronicled a life I'd never known about. March 15th, 1952. The dreams are getting stronger. Last night I saw the young man with dark hair again, standing in what looked like an office building made of glass and steel. He was holding papers, and his face was full of anguish. Mother says the dreams are a gift from our ancestors, that every woman in our line has carried this burden. But sometimes I wonder if it's truly a gift or a curse that traps us in patterns we can't escape. Page after page documented Eleanor's prophetic dreams, her attempts to warn people about coming disasters, and her growing understanding of what she called the temporal web, a network of cause and effect that stretched across time, connecting past, present, and future in ways that defied conventional understanding. But it was an entry dated September 12, 1985, exactly 30 years before my first letter, that made everything clear. Today I performed the ritual Mother taught me, the one her grandmother had taught her. I wrote the first letter to my unborn grandson, using the silver pen that has been in our family for 6 generations. The pen is the key. It doesn't write words from the present, but channels messages from the quantum possibilities that exist in all potential futures. David will receive these letters when he needs them most, but I fear I may have done him more harm than good. The gift comes with a price. Those who are warned may be saved from one fate only to be delivered to another. Maria Castellanos exists in David's future because of these letters, not in spite of them. Every warning I send creates the very conditions that make her betrayal possible. I have tried to save him, but I may have damned him instead. The final entry in that particular journal was dated the day before Eleanor died. I have seen how this ends. David will discover the truth, but knowledge alone won't be enough to save him. The pattern demands completion. Every cycle of warnings and betrayals must play out to its conclusion before a new pattern can begin. But I have hidden one final tool for him, something that exists outside the temporal web. If he's clever enough to find it, he may be able to break the cycle that has trapped our family for generations. The key is in the last place he'll think to look, in the mirror. I ran to Eleanor's bedroom and examined every mirror in the house. Nothing. Then I remembered the antique hand mirror that had always sat on her vanity, the one with the ornate silver handle that I'd admired as a child. I'd assumed it was merely decorative, but now I examined it more carefully. The handle wasn't solid silver. It unscrewed. Inside the hollow compartment was a single key and a note. Storage Unit 348, Secure Space Self-Storage. What Maria doesn't know can save you. Unit 348 was 3 units down from Maria's cache of stolen documents. As I turned the key in the lock, my hands were surprisingly steady. I was beyond fear now, operating in that strange calm that comes when you've moved past panic into pure determination. Inside, I found Eleanor's real gift to me. The unit contained a single desk, a chair, and what looked like a typewriter from the 1940s. But as I examined it more closely, I realized it was something far more sophisticated. The keys were inscribed with symbols I didn't recognize, and instead of paper, it fed into what appeared to be a quantum computer disguised as vintage technology. A note taped to the typewriter explained everything. David, this is the temporal communication device that has been in our family since 1847. Unlike the letters, which show you only one possible future, this machine allows you to communicate directly with all potential versions of yourself across the quantum multiverse. You can send messages not just to your past or future, but to alternate versions of yourself who made different choices, lived different lives, faced different outcomes. Maria believes she's been playing chess while you've been playing checkers. She doesn't know that you now have access to the wisdom and experience of every possible version of yourself who has faced this same challenge. Use this knowledge wisely. The temporal web is more fragile than you might think, and every change you make creates ripples across reality itself. Remember, Maria is not your enemy. She is a symptom of a larger pattern that has been playing out for generations. The true enemy is the cycle itself, the endless loop of warnings and betrayals that has trapped our family in predetermined outcomes. To defeat her, you must be willing to break free from the script entirely and write a new ending. Your loving grandmother, Eleanor Blackwood. I sat down at the machine and began to type, not entirely sure what I was doing, but trusting in the family legacy that had brought me this far. The keys felt warm under my fingers, and as I pressed them, symbols appeared on a screen that materialized in the air above the device. To all versions of David Morrison, I need your help. How do I stop Maria without becoming the villain of my own story? The responses came immediately, flooding the screen with text from dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of alternate versions of myself. Version 7-349. I tried to expose her publicly. It backfired. She turned the narrative against me and I lost everything anyway. Version 2-156. I confronted her directly. She denied everything and convinced the board I was having a breakdown. I ended up in psychiatric care. Version 9-871. I gathered evidence and went to the authorities. She'd anticipated this and had already planted evidence that made me look like the criminal. I spent 5 years in prison. Version 4-523. I tried to beat her at her own game, playing politics and manipulation. I won, but I became the very thing I was fighting against. The victory was hollow. Version after version reported similar outcomes. Every conventional approach to stopping Maria's betrayal had failed across the multiverse. But then I found the message that changed everything. Version 1. I walked away. I let her have the company, started over with nothing, and built something even better. But more importantly, I broke the cycle. My children and their children were free from the temporal web because I chose not to perpetuate the pattern of conflict that had trapped our family for generations. Sometimes the only way to win is not to play the game. That was when I understood what Eleanor had been trying to tell me. The letters, the warnings, the elaborate game of move and counter-move, all of it was part of a pattern that would continue as long as I remained trapped within it. The only way to truly win was to step outside the game entirely. The next morning, I arrived at the Nexus Technologies offices with a plan that none of my alternate selves had tried. Complete honesty. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m., but I asked Maria to meet me privately in my office at 8:30. She arrived looking polished and professional, carrying a leather briefcase that I now knew contained the fabricated evidence of my supposed embezzlement. Her dark hair was pulled back in the severe bun she wore when she meant business, and her expression was carefully neutral. "You wanted to see me before the meeting?" she asked, setting down her briefcase and taking the chair across from my desk. "I know about the storage unit," I said simply. "Both of them." For just a moment, her composure cracked. A flicker of surprise, then calculation, then something that might have been respect crossed her features. When she spoke again, her voice carried a different tone, less performance, more genuine engagement. "How long have you known? About your plans? Since yesterday? About the letters? I'm still figuring that part out." I opened my desk drawer and pulled out one of Eleanor's letters, placing it on the desk between us. "The question is, how long have you known about these?" Maria leaned forward, studying the envelope with its impossible postmark. "Since 2016. I followed you to Eleanor's house after you received what I thought was just a regular letter from your grandmother. When I saw you react like you'd received instructions from God himself, I got curious. It wasn't hard to figure out where she hid them. So you've been reading my warnings for 8 years. Reading them, copying them, analyzing them." She met my gaze directly. "David, do you have any idea what it's like to discover that your business partner is receiving messages from the future? Do you understand the advantage that gives you in every negotiation, every investment decision, every strategic choice? Then why not just ask me about them?" Maria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because according to the letters, I was going to betray you. Every warning painted me as the villain in your story. You were receiving instruction manual for how to defend against me before I'd even decided to become your enemy. The letters didn't predict my betrayal. They created it." I felt the pieces clicking together in my mind. "You're saying you only planned to steal the company because the letters warned me that you would. I'm saying I had two choices: accept the role of villain that your temporal messages had written for me, or spend my life walking on eggshells, trying to prove I wasn't the person those letters said I'd become." She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the Seattle skyline. "Do you know what it does to a person, David, to discover that someone you consider family has been receiving warnings about you for years? To know that every smile, every conversation, every moment of trust has been filtered through the suspicion that you're going to betray them?" The weight of her words hit me like a physical blow. In trying to prevent her betrayal, the letters had created the very conditions that made it inevitable. We'd been trapped in a self-fulfilling prophecy that neither of us had chosen, but both of us had been forced to play out. "The storage unit," I said. "All those plans, the psychological profiles, the timeline. You weren't just preparing to steal from me. You were trying to understand the pattern. I was trying to break free from it." She turned back to face me, and for the first time in years, I saw vulnerability in her expression. But every move I made only confirmed what the letters had predicted. I became exactly what they said I would become, not because it was my nature, but because it was the only role available to me in the story they were telling. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us grappling with the realization that we'd been pawns in a game that was bigger than either of us understood. Finally, Maria spoke again. "So what now? Do we play out the final act of this predetermined tragedy, or do we find a way to write a different ending?" I thought about version 1's message, about choosing not to play the game at all. What if we both walked away? From the company? From the whole pattern? What if we dissolved Nexus Technologies, split the assets fairly, and went our separate ways? What if we refused to be the protagonist and antagonist of this story and chose to be something else entirely? Maria considered this for a long moment. Your letters probably have something to say about that choice too. Then we don't read them. We make this decision without consulting the quantum crystal ball and see what happens when we trust ourselves instead of following a script written by forces we don't understand. For the first time since I'd known her, Maria Castellanos smiled with genuine warmth. You know what, David? That might be the sanest thing either of us has said in years. The board meeting at 9 a.m. proceeded nothing like either Maria or I had anticipated. When we walked into the conference room together, the 7 board members were already seated around the polished mahogany table, their expressions ranging from concern to curious to openly hostile. Harrison Wells, our lead investor and the unofficial chairman of the board, looked up as we entered. Maria, David, thank you for coming. I think we all know why we're here today. Maria and I exchanged glances. We'd agreed to present a united front, to announce our joint decision to dissolve the company and pursue separate ventures. But before either of us could speak, Harrison continued. We've been conducting our own investigation into the financial irregularities Maria brought to our attention yesterday. I have to say, what we've discovered is quite disturbing, but not in the way we expected. He gestured to Linda Chen, our corporate attorney, who opened a thick folder and began distributing copies of documents to everyone present. These are the results of an independent forensic accounting review we commissioned last night, Linda said in her crisp, professional tone. The irregularities are real, but they don't point to embezzlement by David. Instead, they reveal a pattern of systematic data harvesting and corporate espionage that suggests someone has been monitoring and copying our proprietary information for years. My stomach dropped as I realized what they'd discovered. In our haste to uncover Maria's plans, we'd overlooked the possibility that her activities might be detected by the very security systems we'd built to protect the company. Furthermore, Linda continued, we've discovered evidence of unauthorized access to employee personal information, client data, and strategic planning documents. The access pattern suggests someone with high-level privileges has been systematically breaching our own security protocols. Harrison's gaze fixed on Maria with laser intensity. Maria, the access logs clearly show that these breaches originated from your company credentials. Can you explain why you've been copying our entire corporate database to external storage devices? The irony was breathtaking. Maria had been so focused on following the script laid out by the letters that she'd forgotten to cover her digital tracks. Her meticulous preparation for betrayal had created the very evidence trail that would expose her. But instead of denial or deflection, Maria did something that surprised everyone in the room. She stood up and placed her hands flat on the table. You're absolutely right, she said. I have been systematically copying company data for the past 3 years. I've been preparing to leave Nexus and start a competing firm, taking our clients and intellectual property with me. I've been planning to frame David for embezzlement to cover my tracks and damage his reputation enough that he couldn't compete with me. The silence in the room was deafening. Several board members looked genuinely shocked that she was confessing so openly. However, Maria continued, David and I have spent the morning discussing this situation, and we've reached a different conclusion than either of us anticipated. We've decided to dissolve Nexus Technologies entirely, liquidate our assets, and pursue separate business ventures without the acrimony and legal battles that would normally accompany this kind of corporate betrayal. Harrison Wells looked like someone had just told him that gravity had been repealed. You want to dissolve the company? Maria, you're confessing to corporate espionage and theft of intellectual property. David would be within his rights to have you arrested. He would, Maria agreed. But he's choosing not to, just as I'm choosing not to proceed with my original plans. We've both realized that we've been trapped in a pattern of conflict that serves no one's interests, including our own. I stood up beside her. The company we built together has been compromised by mistrust and manipulation. Rather than trying to salvage something that's been poisoned from within, We're choosing to end it cleanly and give everyone, our employees, our investors, our clients, the opportunity to move forward without being caught in the crossfire of our personal conflict. Board member Sarah Hendricks, a sharp-eyed former CEO in her 60s, leaned forward with interest. "This is highly unusual. David, you're essentially volunteering to give up a company worth $12 million rather than fight to keep it?" "I'm choosing to prioritize my future over my past," I replied. "Maria and I built something incredible together, but that partnership is over. Rather than spending the next 5 years in litigation trying to prove who wronged whom, we're going to spend that energy building new things." Linda Chen was frantically taking notes, probably trying to figure out how to structure the legal framework for what we were proposing. The liability issues alone would be staggering. "Maria, you're admitting to activities that could result in criminal charges. The dissolution of the company wouldn't necessarily protect you from prosecution." "I understand that," Maria said, "but I'm hoping that David's willingness to forgive my betrayal will be taken into account if any criminal charges are filed. We're trying to break a cycle of retaliation that would ultimately hurt everyone involved." Harrison looked back and forth between us like he was watching a tennis match played in slow motion. "Are you sure you haven't both suffered some kind of mental breakdown? Because this is not how corporate disputes are typically resolved." Maria and I smiled at each other, and for a moment it felt like we were partners again, united in our shared recognition of how absurd our situation had become. "Maybe we have had a breakdown," I said. "But if so, it's the kind that leads to clarity rather than confusion. We're tired of being characters in a story we didn't write. We're choosing to end this story and start new ones." The legal process of dissolving a multi-million-dollar company proved to be almost as complex as building one had been. Linda Chen worked around the clock for 2 weeks, creating a framework that would satisfy regulators, protect our investors' interests, and provide fair compensation to our employees. The assets were divided based on each person's contribution to the company's success. Maria and I each walked away with roughly $4 million after taxes and legal fees, enough to start over comfortably, but far less than either of us would have received if we'd fought to keep the company intact. Our employees were given generous severance packages and assistance finding new positions. Many of them were recruited by larger cybersecurity firms that were eager to acquire proven talent. A few chose to follow Maria to her new venture, while others expressed interest in working with whatever company I might start in the future. The most difficult part wasn't the legal paperwork or the financial calculations. It was explaining our decision to people who couldn't understand why we were voluntarily destroying something successful. The tech press had a field day with the story, spinning theories about secret feuds, hidden scandals, and corporate conspiracies that were far more dramatic than the truth. But the strangest part of the dissolution process was what happened to the letters. 3 days after we signed the final paperwork, I returned to my grandmother's house to pack up the temporal communication device and the remaining letters. The storage unit that Eleanor had rented was also in my name now, and I'd planned to move everything to a more secure location where I could study the family legacy without worrying about discovery. When I opened the secret compartment in Eleanor's bedroom, the wooden chest was empty. Not just empty, pristine as if it had never contained anything at all. There was no dust outline where the letters had been, no residual scent of old paper, no evidence that the chest had ever served any purpose other than decoration. Panicked, I drove to the storage facility. Unit 348 was also empty. The temporal communication device, the desk, the chair, all of it had vanished without a trace. According to Bill, the facility manager, the unit had been cleaned out 3 days ago by someone with proper authorization, though he couldn't remember who. "Funny thing, though," Bill said, scratching his head. "My records show that unit's been empty for months, but I could have sworn I saw you going in and out of there just last week." I checked Maria's unit as well, also empty, with no record that it had ever been rented. That evening, I called Maria to ask if she'd experienced anything similar. Her response chilled me to the bone. "What letters?" she asked. "David, I don't know what you're talking about. Are you feeling all right?" "The letters from my grandmother, the ones you've been copying for years. The warnings about your betrayal, the temporal communication device. The whole reason we dissolved the company. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. David, we dissolved the company because of your financial irregularities. You were embezzling funds, remember? I discovered the evidence and brought it to the board. You confessed rather than face criminal charges. My blood turned to ice. That's not what happened, Maria. You were the one planning to betray me. You had a storage unit full of stolen documents and fabricated evidence. I think you need to talk to someone, David. A professional. This sounds like you're having some kind of breakdown, creating false memories to avoid dealing with what you actually did. I hung up the phone with shaking hands and immediately called Harrison Wells. His version of events matched Maria's exactly. I had been caught embezzling. I had confessed to avoid prosecution, and the company had been dissolved to minimize the damage to everyone involved. According to everyone except me, I was the villain of this story. The next few months were the most disorienting of my life. Every person I spoke with, board members, employees, clients, even my own lawyer, remembered a version of events in which I was the one who had betrayed the company. The evidence of my supposed embezzlement was real, documented in bank records and accounting files that I couldn't dispute. But I knew what I remembered. I had clear, vivid memories of discovering the letters, reading about Maria's plans, finding her storage unit full of stolen documents. The problem was that no one else shared those memories, and there was no physical evidence to support them. I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the psychiatrist I reluctantly agreed to see, listened patiently as I described the letters, the temporal communication device, and my conviction that reality had somehow been altered. False memory syndrome is more common than you might think, she explained during our third session. When people experience severe stress or trauma, the mind sometimes creates elaborate, alternate narratives to protect the ego from painful truths. These false memories can feel completely real and be accompanied by vivid sensory details. But the letters had specific information that I couldn't have known, I insisted. They predicted events that happened exactly as described. Retroactive pattern recognition, Dr. Martinez said gently. Your mind is looking back at events and creating the illusion that you predicted them, when in reality, you're simply connecting dots that were already there. It's a very sophisticated defense mechanism. She prescribed medication for anxiety and depression, recommended therapy sessions twice a week, and suggested that I focus on accepting responsibility for my actions rather than constructing elaborate fantasies to avoid guilt. But late at night, alone in my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed about reality itself. The dissolution of the company hadn't just ended the pattern that had trapped Maria and me. It had somehow erased the pattern entirely, leaving behind a new timeline in which she was the innocent victim, and I was the guilty party. I started keeping a journal, documenting everything I remembered about the original sequence of events. I wrote down every detail about the letters, the storage units, the temporal communication device, and the conversation Maria and I had shared before the board meeting. If I was going insane, at least I would have a record of my delusions. But as weeks turned into months, something strange began to happen. Other people started mentioning small inconsistencies in their own memories. Linda Chen, our former corporate attorney, called me 6 months after the dissolution to ask about a detail from one of our early board meetings. I could have sworn that Maria was the one who suggested bringing in Harrison Wells as an investor, she said. But according to my notes, it was your idea. My memory of that meeting feels fuzzy somehow. A former employee named Jake Morrison, no relation despite the shared last name, contacted me through LinkedIn with an even stranger message. Hey David, this might sound weird, but I've been having dreams about our old office where everything is different. In the dreams, you and Maria have this big confrontation about some letters, and then you both decide to dissolve the company together. It feels more real than my actual memories of what happened. Have you had any similar experiences? These conversations convinced me that I wasn't losing my mind. Something had genuinely changed about the timeline we were living in. The question was whether this change was permanent or if there was some way to restore the original sequence of events. That's when I decided to return to my grandmother's house one last time, to search for any trace of the family legacy that might still exist. It took me 3 days of systematic searching to find it. Hidden behind a bookshelf in Eleanor's basement was a room that I'd never known existed, accessible only through a concealed door that opened when you pulled on a specific volume of Shakespearean sonnets. The room was small, perhaps 10 feet by 12 feet, with stone walls that looked far older than the Victorian house above. Candlesticks lined the walls, though they'd long since burned down to stubs. In the center of the room was an altar made of black granite, and carved into its surface were symbols that matched the ones I remembered seeing on the temporal communication device. But it wasn't the altar that made my breath catch in my throat. It was the woman sitting behind it. She looked exactly like my grandmother, but younger, perhaps 30 years old. Her hair was dark instead of silver, and her face was unlined by age. But there was no mistaking Eleanor Blackwood's sharp green eyes and distinctive cheekbones. "Hello, David," she said in a voice I recognized but had never heard in this register. "I've been waiting for you to find this place." "You're dead," I said, because it was the only response my shocked brain could manage. "I was at your funeral." "Death is a more flexible concept than most people realize," Eleanor replied with a gentle smile. "When you've spent your life working with temporal mechanics, the line between past, present, and future becomes somewhat blurred. What you buried was my body from this timeline. But consciousness, especially consciousness that's been trained to navigate quantum possibilities, doesn't necessarily end when the brain stops functioning." I sank into the chair that sat opposite the altar, trying to process what I was seeing. "Are you real? Or am I finally having the complete psychotic break that Dr. Martinez has been warning me about?" "Both," Eleanor said. "I'm as real as anything else in your experience. But your perception of me is filtered through your expectations and psychological state. Think of me as a quantum echo, a fragment of consciousness that exists in the spaces between realities." "The letters are gone," I said. "All of them. And everyone remembers a different version of what happened with Maria and the company. That's because you and Maria successfully broke the pattern that had been controlling your lives. When you chose to dissolve the company together rather than playing out the predetermined conflict, you created what we call a quantum collapse. All the potential timelines that had been held in superposition by the letters suddenly resolved into a single, stable reality. But it's the wrong reality. In this version, I'm the villain." Eleanor's expression grew serious. "David, you need to understand something about the nature of temporal manipulation. Every time you change the past or receive information from the future, you create what we call temporal debt. The universe demands balance. If you prevent one tragedy, another must take its place. If you save one person from betrayal, someone else must bear that burden." "So Maria's betrayal was transferred to me?" "Not transferred, redistributed. The pattern demanded a betrayer and a victim. When you and Maria refused to play those roles, the universe assigned them to different people in a way that maintained the overall narrative structure, but allowed you both to escape the cycle." I felt a surge of anger. "That's not fair. I didn't choose to receive those letters. I didn't ask to be part of this temporal manipulation." "Fairness is a human concept, David. The universe operates on different principles. But here's what's important. You're no longer trapped in the pattern. Yes, this reality casts you as the villain of the story, but that story is over. You're free to write new chapters now, to create a future that isn't constrained by the expectations and prophecies that controlled your past. And the price for that freedom is everyone thinking I'm a criminal?" Eleanor stood and walked around the altar, placing a hand on my shoulder. "The price is learning to value truth over reputation, integrity over perception. In the original timeline, you would have spent your life reacting to warnings and prophecies, never making a decision that was truly your own. In this timeline, every choice you make will be authentically yours." "What about the temporal communication device? The family legacy?" "Gone, and good riddance. David, our family has been cursed for 6 generations with the burden of seeing too much, knowing too much, trying to control outcomes that should be left to unfold naturally. You've broken that curse not just for yourself but for any children you might have in the future." I sat in silence for several minutes, trying to absorb the magnitude of what she was telling me. Finally, I asked the question that had been haunting me since the dissolution of the company. "Was any of it real?" The partnership with Maria, the success of the company, the trust we shared. Was it all just an illusion created by temporal manipulation? Eleanor smiled sadly. The feelings were real, David. The work you did together was real. The success you achieved was earned through genuine effort and talent. The temporal manipulation didn't create those things. It just introduced elements of mistrust and conflict that corrupted them. In a sense, by ending the story where you did, you preserved the best parts of your partnership and discarded the worst. So what happens now? Now you live, Eleanor said simply. You build a new life based on your own choices rather than following a script written by forces beyond your control. You learn to trust your instincts instead of relying on supernatural guidance. You discover who David Morrison really is when he's not being warned about the future or manipulated by temporal patterns. As she spoke, Eleanor began to fade, becoming translucent like morning mist. Wait, I called out. I still have questions. How do I know if I'm making the right choices? How do I navigate a future without guidance? Her voice came from everywhere and nowhere, already more echo than substance. The same way everyone else does, David. One day at a time, with courage and wisdom, and the understanding that some mistakes are worth making if they lead to authentic growth. Trust yourself. You're more capable than you know. And then she was gone, leaving me alone in a basement room that suddenly felt like just another part of an old house, with no trace of the otherworldly presence that had filled it moments before. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of a downtown Seattle office building, waiting for the elevator that would take me to the 32nd floor. In my briefcase was a business plan for a new cybersecurity consulting firm that I'd spent months developing, without the benefit of temporal guidance or supernatural warnings. The company would be small, at least initially, just me and 2 junior programmers I'd hired fresh out of the University of Washington. We would focus on helping small and medium-sized businesses protect themselves from cyber threats, providing personalized service that the big firms often overlooked. I'd named the company Phoenix Security, partly because it represented rising from the ashes of my previous life, but mostly because I liked the idea of rebirth and transformation. The Phoenix doesn't simply return to what it was before. It becomes something new and different, shaped by the experience of destruction and renewal. The meeting I was heading to was with Janet Richardson, the CEO of a mid-sized accounting firm that had been hit by a ransomware attack the previous month. She was looking for someone to redesign her company's security infrastructure from the ground up. It was exactly the kind of challenging, complex project that Phoenix Security needed to establish credibility in the market. As the elevator climbed toward the 32nd floor, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine excitement about an uncertain future. For the first time since childhood, I was walking into a situation without knowing how it would end, without the benefit of warnings or prophecies or temporal guidance. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The meeting went better than I'd hoped. Janet Richardson was sharp, practical, and refreshingly direct about her company's vulnerabilities. She'd done her research on my background, including the circumstances surrounding Nexus Technologies' dissolution, but she seemed more interested in my technical expertise than in gossip about past corporate drama. "I'll be honest with you, David," she said as we wrapped up our discussion. "The fact that you were willing to confess your mistakes and dissolve your previous company, rather than drag everyone through years of litigation, actually makes me more inclined to trust you, not less. It suggests you have integrity and the courage to take responsibility for your actions." 2 weeks later, she hired Phoenix Security to overhaul her entire cybersecurity infrastructure. That first contract led to others. Word spread through Seattle's business community about the consulting firm that provided thorough, personalized security assessments at reasonable rates. Within a year, Phoenix Security had grown to 12 employees and was turning away more business than we could accept. But the real measure of my new life wasn't professional success. It was personal growth. For the first time in my adult life, I was making decisions based on my own judgment rather than following guidance from external sources. Some of those decisions were mistakes, but they were my mistakes, and I learned from them in ways that felt authentic and meaningful. I started dating again, tentatively at first, then with more confidence as I learned to trust my instincts about people. I reconnected with old friends who had drifted away during the intense years of building Nexus Technologies. I took up hobbies that had nothing to do with business or technology: rock climbing, cooking, photography. Most importantly, I learned to live with uncertainty without constantly seeking reassurance from supernatural sources. The anxiety never completely disappeared, but it became manageable, part of the normal human experience rather than a crippling fear of making the wrong choice. I did occasionally wonder what had happened to Maria. I'd heard through the tech industry grapevine that she'd started her own cybersecurity firm in Portland and was doing well, but I resisted the urge to investigate further. Whatever path she was walking now, it was separate from mine, and that separation felt healthy and necessary. The only reminder of my strange family legacy was the Victorian house in Capitol Hill, which I'd inherited but never sold. I couldn't bring myself to live there, too many memories of temporal manipulation and otherworldly interventions, but I couldn't quite let it go either. Instead, I rented it to a young family who filled it with the sounds of children and normal domestic life. Sometimes when I drove past the house on my way to meetings or social events, I would see toys scattered in the front yard and laundry hanging on lines in the backyard, and I would feel a profound sense of satisfaction that the place had been reclaimed for ordinary human purposes. The basement room where I'd encountered Eleanor's quantum echo remained locked and undisturbed. I'd sealed the hidden door and had no intention of ever opening it again. Some chapters of family history were better left closed. 2 years after the dissolution of Nexus Technologies, I received one last piece of mail related to my grandmother's estate. It was a letter from the law firm that had handled Eleanor's will, informing me that a safety deposit box I'd been unaware of was now mine to claim. The box was small and contained only 3 items: a photograph, a sealed envelope, and a key I didn't recognize. The photograph was of Eleanor as a young woman, standing next to a man I didn't recognize in front of what looked like the same basement room where I'd encountered her quantum echo. They were both holding what appeared to be early versions of the temporal communication device, and their expressions were serious, almost grim. The sealed envelope was addressed to "The Last David Morrison" in Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a final message that provided closure to the most confusing chapter of my life. "David, if you're reading this letter, it means you've successfully broken the temporal pattern that has controlled our family for 6 generations. The photograph shows me with your great-great-grandfather, Marcus Blackwood, who created the first temporal communication device in 1847. He believed he was creating a tool to help future generations avoid the mistakes of the past. Instead, he created a trap that bound our family to predetermined patterns of conflict and betrayal. Every generation has tried to break free from the pattern, but until now, none have succeeded. Your grandmother Catherine tried to destroy the device in 1923, but it simply reappeared when the temporal debt demanded payment. Your great-aunt Rose tried to escape the family legacy by moving to Europe in 1961, but the letters followed her there and eventually drove her to suicide. You accomplished what 6 generations of our family could not because you did something none of us had thought to try. You embraced the role of villain rather than fighting it. By accepting responsibility for actions you didn't commit, by choosing truth over reputation, you satisfied the universe's demand for balance without perpetuating the cycle of retaliation that had trapped us all. The key in this box opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank downtown, box number 1847. Inside, you'll find enough money to ensure that you never have to worry about financial security again. Consider it payment for the service you've done our family and future generations. But more importantly, David, you've given our family something we haven't had in over a century: the gift of uncertainty. Your children, should you choose to have them, will face the future with nothing but their own judgment and courage to guide them. They will make mistakes and experience failures, but they will also have the joy of genuine surprise and the satisfaction of authentic achievement. The temporal pattern is broken. The cycle has ended. The letters will never come again. Live well, David. Live freely. You've earned both the right and the responsibility to write your own story. With love and gratitude, your grandmother, Eleanor Blackwood. I sat in my car outside the bank for nearly an hour after reading the letter, watching ordinary people go about their ordinary lives, shopping, talking on phones, walking dogs, arguing with parking meters. For the first time in my life, I felt like I truly belonged among them. The safety deposit box contained exactly what Eleanor had promised: bonds and certificates worth nearly $8 million, enough to ensure financial freedom for the rest of my life. But the money felt less important than the letter's confirmation that I had indeed broken free from the temporal pattern that had controlled my family for generations. That evening, I burned the letter in the fireplace of my apartment, watching Eleanor's final words dissolve into ash and smoke. The photograph and the key I kept, not as relics of supernatural legacy, but as reminders of the price of freedom and the importance of choosing authentic uncertainty over manipulated certainty. 3 months later, I met Sarah Chen at a coffee shop in Belltown. She was a teacher at a local elementary school, thoughtful and kind, with no connection to the technology industry or my complicated past. Our conversation flowed easily, moving from books to travel to dreams for the future without a single mention of temporal patterns or family curses. When she asked what I did for work, I told her I ran a small cybersecurity consulting firm. When she asked about my previous experience, I mentioned that I'd been involved with a startup that hadn't worked out. Simple, honest answers that contained no supernatural elements or inexplicable coincidences. "Have you ever felt like your life was following a script?" she asked during our third date, as we walked along the waterfront watching ferries cross Elliott Bay. "Actually, yes," I replied, "but not anymore. These days I'm making it up as I go along." She smiled and took my hand. "That's the best way to live, don't you think? Not knowing exactly what comes next, but being excited to find out." I squeezed her hand gently, feeling the solid warmth of human connection that required no supernatural intervention or temporal manipulation. "Yes," I said, "I think it is." Thank you for listening to this incredible journey through time, betrayal, and redemption. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel and share it with someone who appreciates tales of mystery and the supernatural. The truth is often stranger than fiction, and sometimes the only way to find freedom is to embrace the very thing we've been trying to escape. Until next time, remember, your future is yours to write, and that's both the most terrifying and most beautiful truth of all.